Hi everybody, and welcome to the 2011 Speight's Coast to Coast web seminars. Hopefully you've seen one of the other two that have been on. This is the third one in the series, and these are to commemorate the 30th anniversary of the Speight's Coast to Coast. So tonight's session is part two of how to prepare for your Speight's Coast to Coast, and today we're going to be talking a little bit about nutrition and some of kayaking, and perhaps a couple of little things on recovery and the importance of a day 3 weeks out from the coast to coast. So first, the housekeeping. If you haven't joined us before, and hopefully you would have because this is the third session, there's a chat room to the right hand side of the web page. You can type in questions as they occur to you, and it's a simple procedure to register. Just log in and a username, and we'll endeavour to answer your questions. So, who am I? I'm Kelly Barber. I've done 12 coast to coast, written a book, Conquering the Coast to Coast, done the 1 day, the 2 day, and the teams events. So, had a bit of experience. But I'm really excited tonight because my guest this evening is Emily Miazga. Emily is the CEO and founder of M's Power Cookies. She's a 3-time winner of the 1 day coast to coast. In fact, she's won came out the right side of probably one of the closest races ever a few years ago when she won by a matter of seconds and took the lead in the last kilometre of the race. She lives on the west coast, and she's got a master's degree in clinical nutrition. So joining me now is Emily Miazga. Hey Em, how are you?
Good. Kelly, how are you?
I'm very well, thanks.
Good.
Great that you could join us.
Yeah, thanks.
Just come over from the west coast?
Yep, we just drove over now and arrived, and here we are, so it's been a busy day.
Good. Okay, so could you tell us a little bit about what you've been up to? I mean, obviously you're a very busy woman, and I understand you're not racing this year as well?
Yeah, that's right. This year I'm not going to race the Coast to Coast, which is the first time in 8 years, so it's a bit of a change for me. I'm going from a racing role to a support role. My husband's going to race it, so that should be exciting. But I'm just focusing on M's Power Cookies this year because I've had quite a lot of changes this year with my business. I just changed distribution, so I have Britton Wynyard distributing M's, and so basically they do Polar, they do ASICs, they do Noon, which is the Noon is an electrolyte replacement drink. It's a supplement you put into drinks. They're little tablets.
Yeah.
So anyway, they're in a really wide range of sports stores, and they're really proactive with marketing M. So I just got back from a 3-week road trip in the North Island. We were promoting the cookies at the ITU Triathlon, at Taupo, at the Goat, and then this weekend is the fourth weekend. We've got the Classic River Race and the Pegasus Triathlon Festival. So after this weekend, I get a break, but I'm going to race the Classic River Race because I just love my kayak so much, and I love paddling so much, and we'll talk a bit more about that later. We will be talking about kayaking. So I guess it's great to have you here, and especially able to talk about nutrition and it's something I think that a lot of people struggle with on the race, and it can make or break your race one way or the other. Yeah. So could you tell us a little bit about your experience in terms of nutrition, maybe mistakes you've made and things that you've learned along the way? Yeah, absolutely. Nutrition, of course, is something that it's very easy to get it wrong, but it's also equally just as easy to get right. And all you need is a little bit of education, and you need to know some tools and some guidelines. And so it's not easy, and I can really empathize with people because I'm trained as a dietitian, and I've got all the textbook knowledge, but there's one thing to take that textbook knowledge and then to actually apply it in the actual racing. And so, I've made a lot of mistakes myself. And for example, in the 2006 Coast to Coast, which was the first year that I won it, I took too much nutrition on the first bike ride, too much fluid actually, in the form of a sports drink. I had 2 bottles of sports drink, and I'll run through later what I actually do on the day, and then people can kind of adapt based on that because I've got it dialed. But what happened is I had too much nutrition on that first bike ride, so then in the mountain run I had quite a lot of nausea and some stomach problems.
Yeah, I think a lot of people experience that. I know I've felt it myself following Steve Gurney's race plan, which I talked about in the first week.
Too many gels.
Too many gels, and not the same sort of power output.
And that's the thing, is like the problem with having, too many gels, and like for me it was a combination of too much sports drink. I had a power cookie on the first bike ride and then 2 bottles of sports drink. And it was just too much of that simple carbohydrate, and that can just leave you feeling really sickly. And the classic thing is you see athletes taking so many gels because a lot of the top Ironman and professionals, they really rely on gels because they don't like to have as much solid food because the gels are quicker and easier to eat. But if you're not used to them and you're not used to racing with them under that kind of level of stress, it can cause a lot of stomach upset. So what you need to do is figure out that balance of having the quick nutrition and then the solid nutrition or the real food. And
so let's just go through a typical race from the beginning to end. Maybe the night before, and what would you suggest the night before, and say what have you used yourself?
Well, should we back it up and talk a little bit about carbo loading?
Yes.
Okay, so with carbo loading, excuse me, the guideline for carbo loading is to start anywhere. You can do it from 24 hours to 72 hours before the event. And what carbo loading means is it's a way to basically super load up your muscles with glycogen, because when you eat carbohydrate, so carbohydrate is breads, pastas, fruits, vegetables, sugars, whether they're added sugars or natural sugars, these carbohydrates turn into blood sugar in your body, and then they're stored in your muscles and in your liver, and that's called stored glycogen. So then on the race day, your body actually draws on that stored glycogen. Of course, you have to continue to top up your carbohydrates as the day goes on, because inevitably it's really hard to actually eat enough to make up. It's physically impossible to eat enough to make up what you're actually burning on the day.
So if you've carbo loaded properly the night before, so when is that really going to run out? So like if you didn't take nutrition, say, in the first couple of hours, when would your carbo loading run out? Well, do you think, roughly?
Well, you've heard the term hitting the wall.
Yes.
Hitting the wall means you've used up all of your energy source that's in your body. So all of the stored glycogen that's in your liver and in your muscles, you've used it up. And that generally happens for most people after around the 2-hour mark. Well, with the coast to coast, if you're doing longest day, you're looking at sort of a 12 to 15, 16-hour day. And even if you're doing the 2-day or the teams event, you're going to be out there for a few hours at a time. On the mountain run, you're out there for four hours more. On the paddle, you're going to be out for 4 to 5 hours or more. And so you've got to really plan on the longer you're going to be out, the more you've got to have your nutrition on board for that whole time. But 2 hours is that magic thing. So
so about 2 hours. Can you put some numbers on say the calories that someone would burn up, say in the 2-day, till about lunchtime, as opposed to someone going the whole day in the 1 day? So what sort of calorie output would there be in a day?
We actually base it off grams of carbohydrate consumed or required, because everyone has different metabolic rates, and calories come from carbohydrates, fats, and protein. But when you're actually out there and figuring out your nutrition plan for the day, it's really important to just look at the grams of carbohydrate. So the guideline for the grams of carbohydrate, and it's very individualized, but the golden rule guideline is 1 gram of carbohydrate per kilo of body weight per hour. So if you weigh 60 kilos, you have 60 grams of carb an hour. If you weigh 80 kilos, you have 80 grams of carb an hour. Give or take. If you go over that threshold, you might find that you're not going to absorb it, and then that's when you can end up with stomach problems, which is like what happened to me on that day in the 2006 Coast to Coast. So what you've got to do is actually work out and practice in your training. Look at the food labels. The beauty is with all the food labels, you know exactly how much carbohydrates in a serving. 1 M's Power Cookies is about 45 grams of carbohydrate. 1 bottle of sports drink is about 40 grams of carbohydrate. 1 sports gel is about 25 grams of carbohydrate. So what you're going to do is you're going to work out how much you need to, what's it going to take to get you through that day? So you're going to have your combination of your drinks, your gels, and your real food. And then this is where the tricky part comes in, because you want to have a balance of your quick sugars. So the quick sugars are your gels and your sports drinks and your gummies and your lollies and your Coke and that sort of thing. And then you've got what's called the log on the fire. And so that's the slow burning nutrition. That's what's going to give you some satiation. That's got a bit of fat and protein in it. And you need to have that, and that adds to your calories. But you're not actually, in the Krebs cycle, you are burning a little bit of amino acids and fat. Yeah. But it's from your body's stores. It's not necessarily from what you're taking on board at the time. That's why carbohydrate is king. Yeah. You're looking at 1 gram of carb per kilo of body weight per hour.
Okay. So, I mean, so what are the good kind of carbohydrate-based things that you would recommend in a day?
Yeah. For the coast to coast.
For the coast to coast, because, I mean, everybody's heard the stories of Keith Murray on ginger nuts and raro, and people have heard, carbo loading, so let's have lots of noodles and things like that. Yeah. Fruitcake is one of the old traditional things that people used in the coast to coast. So what types of foods can people get their carbohydrate from?
Anything like that you mentioned, Kelly, is going to be fine. So the key is to test it in training and make sure that your stomach can tolerate it. Don't go for really high fat things. So if it's got, 15, 20, 25 grams of fat per serving, like those big cookies that you can get or chocolate bars, it's going to be too high in fat, and what that's going to do is displace your carbohydrates. So look for things that are high in carb. You don't want too high of a fiber content. A little bit of oats, like in my cookies, you've got oats, and in other sports bars, it's really good because it's a low GI, it's a sustained energy source. So those types of things are fine. Like the first year that I did coast to coast, and the second year, I think I had on that middle bike ride, I have cheese and Vegemite sandwiches, and I had power cookies. I had a bit of a mixture of everything. But the last sort of 5 years that I've done coast to coast, I've just decided keep it really simple. My products, the whole reason why I started the business was because the products work. They're good. Yeah. So why over-engineer it? Why muck around with fruitcake and, baggies and sandwiches and potatoes falling all over the place? And although, sure, they might work, but it's a little old school. If you can find a really good sports nutrition bar that works for you, i.e. Power cookies, that's all I eat. I'm not just plugging it to say, to plug it. It's the truth.
You live it.
I live it. I do it. They really do work. And so over the course of the day, what I would do in longest days have about, do you want me to just run through exactly what I have on the day?
Yeah, okay. Let's just go through it sort of step by step.
Yeah. And what I'll do is I'll go through what I have on the actual day, and then maybe after that we'll back it up and I'll cover carbo loading, because that is, I think we do need to give that a little bit more attention.
A little airtime.
Yeah.
Okay,
so starting on the day, I don't sleep. I don't think anybody sleeps. But
you don't need to, eh?
Yeah, you don't need to. But now this regimen is going to be applicable to whether you're doing the 2-day or the 1 day. For the teams, you're probably not going to need quite as much. But for the 2-dayers, if you're doing the individual, you still need to you're still out there for that same amount of time. So just this applies to both. So for breakfast, I get up. For me personally, I've worked out that I need to have breakfast about 2 hours before the race. So it starts at 6. Right. So by 4 a.m., I'm lucky I've got a really good husband, and he brings me my coffee in bed. And so what I do is I have a coffee. I have a big bowl of rolled oats, because that's what I'm used to. Lots of brown sugar, dates, some almonds, a bit of rice milk, because we don't drink dairy.
Right. Is dairy okay, though?
Dairy's fine, yeah. If you want to have dairy, that's fine. I have rice milk. And then I have a banana. So that total amount of carbohydrate is about 150 to 200 grams of carb. Plus, I start sipping on a bottle of sports drink, okay? Because that's part of that super hydration process as well with the carbo loading.
So not water, just...
use sports drink, because you need the carbohydrate. Right. It's part of the pre-carbo loading and the pre-fueling, and, with your fluids. And also, you just have to get that. You've got to get as much in as you can. And the recommended amount...
What about toast and other cereals, Wheat Bix and things like that?
Yeah,
You've got to watch the sugar content in some of them?
No, sugars are good. Okay. Carbs and sugars are sugars are carbohydrates. Yeah. So and then people go, well, what about simple carbs and complex carbs? And the key with your pre-race breakfast is you want it to be low GI, meaning low glycemic index, sustained energy. Wheat Bix is high GI, white toast, even brown toast, those are high GI because they're more processed. You want to go with something more grainy, and you also want to have a bit of fruit or something. But at the end of the day, you've got to make sure that it works for you. Practice it in training. Use some of your sort of lower priority races to
try
this out, because if you've never had oats and then you go and do what I say and try to have it on race day, you're going to have stomach problems. So make sure that you can actually tolerate it. If you're used to Wheat Bix and that works for you, fine.
Okay.
Now the amount of carbohydrate that you need to have is 200 to 300 grams of carbohydrate in that pre-morning breakfast. Right. So look on your food labels, look at how much you're having, and just add it up. And you want to be aiming for that amount. It's a lot of food, and that's where having the sports drink helps you to get to that level.
So you're sipping on your drink bottle, and you're going down to the start.
Yeah.
The horn goes off. You run that first 3Ks and you get to the bike.
Yeah. So you get on the bike and you settle into your pace for about the first sort of 10, 15 minutes. And then for me personally, I've worked out that I have 1 bottle of sports drink and 1 bottle of water or Noon. Noon is a sugar-free electrolyte replacement. Yeah. So what I do is I'm sipping on that sports drink on that first bike ride. And then exactly at about 7:15, I have my first log on the fire. And that's my first power cookie bar.
7:15 is an hour.
It's an hour and a quarter into the race. You have the first log on the fire. Yeah. So the first part you're sipping on your quick nutrition. An hour and a quarter into it, you have your first bar. You don't feel like having it because you've got breakfast on board, but you're not eating it for that moment in time. You're eating it for the 2 to 3 hours down the road. Important. Does that make sense? Like it's all about eating to prevent the onset of running out of sugars. And because it's such a long day, and even if you're doing 2 days, it's really important to have something that's got some sustenance to it.
Right.
Otherwise, if you just rely on gels, you're going to puke. And I've seen it happen time and time again.
So how many grams are we talking about here?
The cookie would give me about 45 grams of carb, and the bottle of sports drink is about 40.
Right.
So that gives me 85 grams of carb for that first leg.
Right.
Which is about spot on with where I need to be. I go into the mountain run.
Yeah.
And of course, you're drinking water on the river crossings.
Right.
Hopefully, we can keep doing that forever. Nice clean rivers.
Yeah, important.
Yeah, very important. And then what I do on the mountain run is I have about 4 to 5 gels.
Yeah.
And I start my first gel at about the 40 to 45 minute mark into the run. Generally, it's coming into Slippery Rocks is when I have my first gel.
So those gels, 25 grams?
25 grams of carb per gel. Yeah.
Okay.
And they're real easy. And what I find works really well is I've got one of those backpacks with the zip pockets in the front.
Oh, I have one of those.
Yeah. And so I've got my food evenly distributed between the 2 zip pockets on my front, so I can access my food really easily. And then I finish my gel, and then I've got a pocket in the back of the pack, and I tuck it into the back, so then the garbage doesn't muck up your food pockets.
You don't just throw it in the river?
Yeah.
You can be disqualified.
Yes. In fact, Steve Gurney once stopped in a race and picked up. He accidentally dropped a wrapper, and he went back and picked it up. So he was.
He's a good man.
Doing good.
He's a good man.
Okay, so first gel about 45 minutes into the run. Yeah. And then sort of about, another 30, 45 minutes later, I'll have my next gel.
Right.
And then I'll usually have another gel sort of up past, like, the big boulder section. That's a good section because you're going a bit slower. You're using more of your leg strength to go up over the boulder, so you're not breathing as hard.
So that's about an hour and a half into the run?
About an hour and a half into it.
Yeah. And so the next one would be maybe around Goat Pass or something like that?
The next one would be at Goat Pass. I have a cookie bar. That's the second log on the fire. So as I'm coming up Goat Creek...
So how many grams is that again, roughly?
1 cookie bar is 45 grams of carb.
Good.
Okay?
Yeah.
So I'll tell you what the total is at the end of the day. And the trick is don't try to add up the grams of carb per leg. Add up the grams of carb for the whole day, but split it out throughout the day that makes sense logically, i.e. in the run, although it's a 4-hour run, you're only going to really eat 1 bar because it's tough to eat when you're on the run.
Yeah.
And same thing in the paddle. I have another bar on the paddle, but most of my nutrition on the paddle comes from liquid because that's got in my drinking system, and it's very easy.
Okay, that's actually...
So...
Yeah, that's a good point. So let's assume that every 45 minutes you're taking 25 grams... through the sports drinks, through the gels.
Through the gels,
You get to the end. Do you use those times when you're slowing down, like at the transitions? Because Steve said that he just uses them to keep moving.
Yeah.
But I used to use them to actually take time out to eat.
No, I never eat in transition. You use the transitions to go. You eat on the go because you can always eat and walk or ride or whatever at the same time.
Right.
Why waste the time in the transitions? You've trained so hard. If you stop and sit on your ass and eat in transition, it's just kissing that time goodbye.
People used to sit on seats. In fact,
I know.
one of
funny.
One of my first photos of myself in
Yeah.
the transition is sitting down having something to eat.
Yeah. But you know what? That's fine too. Like, and it depends what your goals are. Like, if your goal is just to complete the day and you really want to enjoy it, and you need to stop and eat, just stop and eat and enjoy it. Because if you don't, if you undereat, you're going to suffer, you know, and you want to enjoy the day. It's about having fun. So anyway, so I have my bar at Goat Pass.
Yeah.
And then coming down Goat Pass, I'm generally just running pretty hard because it's all downhill descending. And then once you start hitting the Minga River, there's not as many opportunities to drink because you don't have the same amount of river crossings. So that's when I try to time another gel, like basically from the top of Goat's Pass to Dudley's Knob. That takes me about 40 minutes.
Yeah.
And so by the time I get to Dudley's, I'm having another gel. But then after Dudley's, so that's my that would be my fourth gel.
Yeah.
And then after Dudley's, I have gummy snakes. So once I come out the bottom of the Minga, and that last section, as you're running up the Minga before you get to the last river crossing, there's, because you don't want to drink from the Beely, but that last river crossing.
A lot of people won't know where the Beely is. The Beely's kind of probably in the last 3 kilometres before you get to Klondike Corner, which is the end of the running stage. So a lot of people don't like to drink out of that because there
can be jargon in it. Yeah. So that last little bit, because it's getting to the end of the run, you're starting to get a little bit tired. I'm getting a little bit sick of the gels, so I just change it up a little bit, and I'll have gummy snakes, and I'll generally have about 4 or 5 gummy snakes at a time, and each gummy snake's about 5 grams of carbs.
Right.
So I have 4 or 5, so it's like the same as having one gel, and I'll have sort of 1 to 2 feedings of the snakes. Sounds a bit sadistic, but so I eat the snakes. Coming out the run, and I remember the one year, and it was actually the 2009 Coast to Coast, and Fleur Posey and I were running together over Goat Pass, and we were doing the descent together, and she was in front of me, and I was behind her, and I was watching her, and Fleur, and I'd given her crap for this. She wasn't eating enough, and I was monitoring that. And I took note of it, and I was like, oh, yeah, she's not eating enough. So we got out of the run. We were coming out, and it was quite cold, and I was struggling to get my food because my hands were real cold. And so I was eating my snakes, and as I had to slow down a bit to get the food in, and Fleur ran away from me, and she put about 2 minutes on me coming out of the last 20 minutes of the run. Yeah. But then we got onto the middle bike ride, and I caught her in the middle bike ride, and it was just because I knew she wasn't fueling enough and that I could catch her. So you really, that's just an example of the power of knowing what's happening out there, knowing what you need, and saying, okay, well, I know what's required, and what this day involves, and that person's not eating enough, so I'm gonna get them.
Yeah, you're gonna see that. Yeah. So can you just can you give a ratio? If you were to say, your race, your preparation and everything is say 100%, your final result is 100%. How important, if you could put a percentage on it, training, etc.
Should I finish my nutrition for the day?
No.
We haven't even got through the mountain run.
Oh, I know. I mean, no. I'm just trying to kind of create a context for people as to how important their nutrition is, because a lot of people I know don't take it that seriously, and I never took it that seriously myself. So,
I say to people, getting your nutrition right is hard. It's hard work. You can't just rock up on race day and do it. Okay, like nutrition is equally as important as your training, if not more important, because you can go, and I've done this myself, going into races when you're unfit, and if you get your nutrition right, you can actually slide. You can actually do okay. So it's very important, at least as important as your training. So, and it sucks. I love my cookies, but it sucks eating them when I'm racing, because it's just you're eating it and you're just going, so when I come off, to give you an example, when I come off the mountain run, you're rooted, and in longest day, you've got to get straight on the bike, and you got to start riding. And that 15K ride, I have a whole bottle of sports drink, plus I sip on water, plus I get down a cookie bar. Yeah. So that's another 85 grams of carb in a 30-minute section, but I have to get it in because I'm catching up from the mountain run, because I go a wee bit light on the mountain run because it's a higher heart rate zone, so I don't eat as much. But on that middle bike ride, and I know, and I'm pushing it on that middle bike ride, and I'm eating my bar, and I'm going, I love my bar, and I was going, man, I can't swallow it. So you take a bite of your food, you get your sports drink,
you drink
you take a sip of drink, you gurgle it in your mouth, you gulp it down like a pelican, get it in, suck it up, and then you'll thank me for it later, because you have to do it. If you're pushing too hard and you can't eat, you're going to suffer later.
Okay. Now, we're starting to run out of time because we've got to cover a bit on the kayaking.
Okay.
So can you just summarize the kayak?
Okay.
And then the last bike ride.
This part is now easy. So you've had your nutrition on the middle bike ride. You get into the paddle.
Yeah.
Paddle, because you don't want to take your hands off the paddle, it's best to get most of your nutrition from liquid. So in the paddle, for me, I budget for it to take me at least 4 hours, and for that time I have 3 liters of Horley's Replace, which is my sports drink. I have 1.5 liters of Coke, which I start the Coke halfway down the paddle. So I've got my drinking system in bags, and it sits under my legs, and it comes out my tube. So I've got 2 tubes attached to my life jacket. Very simple system. So I've got my drink in this tube, my Coke in this tube, and halfway down the paddle I have my 4th power cookie bar. And that's the 4th log on the fire.
Right.
Okay. So that gets me through to the end of the paddle. By the time you get to the end of the paddle, you've only got sort of 2 to 2.5 hour bike ride into Christchurch. At that point, you've been racing for a long time, whether you're doing 1 day or 2 day. You don't need to have the logs on the fire at this point. At this point, you want gummies, snakes, you want Coke, you want gels. So this is just
instant energy to
you want the instant energy, the quickest stuff. And the good formula is about on that ride, to help break it up, every 15 minutes, you're taking something, whether it's a gel or a couple sips of sports drink or a couple sips of Coke or some gummy snakes. And I pull all of the toys out of the cot for that one. I have all the tools in the box out, and I have a selection of things to choose from. And what I do is, as I'm running up the hill to the transition, my support crew's just stuffing the snakes into my pockets. They've got the Coke on my bike, so it's sort of half a bottle of Coke, half a bottle of sports drink, couple gels on the bike, finish, done, get to the end, have a Speight. That's the day.
That's the day. That's done. Okay, probably one of the most important things, recovery. Recovery for training and recovery from the race. Probably more recovery from training.
It's very important.
How important is it to have something, and what should you have after a big training session?
Okay,
so how soon?
And how soon? Okay, the window is 30 minutes after training. You want to have, and it's a formula, get your pens out, it's 1.2 grams of carb per kilo of body weight for that training session, plus 10 to 20 grams of protein. So an example for that would be like, you could have a sandwich and a piece of fruit and a bottle of sports drink, or you could have like a big protein milkshake smoothie thingy.
Right.
But oftentimes those won't have enough carbohydrate in them, so you need to add carbs. So you got to add some honey or some sugar or some fruit or whatever to bulk up the carbohydrate content. The protein is important, 10 to 20 grams of protein, but again the carbohydrate. So 1.2 grams of carb per kilo. Right. But then you want to repeat, like this is the textbook thing, is you want to repeat that formula every hour for the next 3 hours after a big session. But that's not practical, so what I always do is I have my post-training snack within the 30 minutes, and then I do some stretching, I have a shower, and then I back it up with a big meal. And your big meal needs to be a carbohydrate-based meal, like a big pasta meal with like lots of veggies or curry, bread, potatoes, all the stuff that the dieters and like all the stuff that they say you're not supposed to have. Carbohydrate is king. Choose healthy carbs like potatoes with the skin, lots of fiber, good nutrition, and
Okay. Oh, look, that's great stuff, Em, and I think that's going to be really powerful for a lot of people. You may like to actually look at this webcast again to pick a lot of that stuff up, because there's a lot of really good information in there, and it will take a little bit of time to digest. If you've got any questions, I know we've been running quite quickly. Feel free to ask them, and we'll see if we can answer them. There's a couple of little questions in there at the moment. What have we got there? Sponsors allowed. Branding on the kayak, bike, vest. I don't think it's too much of a problem as long as it doesn't interfere with the race sponsors. Like Speight and the logos that you have on your Tule on your uniform, and Em's Power Cookies.
Em's Power Cookies.
You're one of the sponsors as well.
Yeah, I am.
I think we should talk a wee bit about kayaking.
Yes.
Since this was one of the prerequisites.
Yes.
Okay, so as I've talked about before, just in these last few minutes, it's 4 to 5 hours of kayaking, and it's kind of braided river and then gorge and then braided river again. And I've talked a little bit before with Steve about the fear and how people worry about the kayak. can you tell us a little bit about your experiences in the kayak? Because I understand you had a baptism of fire.
Yeah, I pretty much did, eh? Well, the kayak was very interesting for me. I had a very steep learning curve at the beginning, and then I went to an Eclipse boat, which worked for my first 2 coast-to-coast, and then I decided to upgrade. And the year that I upgraded, I went to a Sprinter. And the first trip down the river, it was actually in October with...
Oh, man, must have been cold.
Oh, it was a big flow. I had paddled it once on flat water. It was an old-school Sprinter. We called it the Millennium Falcon. It's the best boat. But what happened is the foot pedals were bloody. They'd slip back on me, and I ended up having a nightmare, and I had, I had 9 swims. And so we just made it an even dozen, and I jumped out of the boat a few more times. Yeah. So basically I had a real nightmare trip, and I was with friends, and we would just kind of laughed it off, and it was but I was at a point where this was the going into the 2006 coast to coast, and I'd sold my Eclipse. I couldn't go back to the Eclipse. I had to upskill. So what I did, it taught me a very, very important lesson. And what I did is I took this boat out, I got it set up, I got comfortable in it, I got the foot pedals fixed. I took it out to I was living in Christchurch, I took it out to the Sumner Bar on an incoming tide, playing the waves. I learned how to roll. You know what? I'm so... I love kayaking so much, and I'm so bomber confident. I have a healthy respect for the river, don't get me wrong, and my heart always goes a flutter, but it's got to the point where rather than fearing the river, I love it because I figured it out, and I was in a position where I was basically forced to upskill. Yeah. So
it'd be fair to say that your bad experience put you in a space where you really had to do all that preparation. So you'd gone into the river a little bit too early, and you'd learnt from that. And I think it's a really important thing because a lot of people do fear the river and worry about it, and rightly so. But with I guess the right kind of preparation,
I think it's important to be prepared. Have a healthy respect for the river, but don't be scared of it. The river's your friend. When I go down the river, it sounds a bit kooky, but I talk to it, and I'm I become one with the river, and the waves, and the rapids. The rapids are the fun part. Instead of shitting yourself going to the rapids and being all tense, smile and enjoy it because that's the fun part. You don't have to do as much work.
Okay, well, I made a couple of notes here about my own experience, just on the confidence I think that you have when you're kayaking is based on your skills. So if you can you get control by knowing where your limits are, feeling the rail of your boat.
A really good one you can do, I was just doing it yesterday, because last minute I decided to enter the Classic River Race. I'm not very fit right now, but I'm doing it anyway. But what you can do is you rail your boat over. My friend Olivia Spencer.
What does rail mean?
Rail means you tip your boat over onto the side rail of the boat. I lean right over, so my spray skirt is in the water. And what I do is... your paddle's like an arm. If you're walking down the street and you fall, you don't fall on your face. You put your arm out, right? It's the same thing with a boat. You've got your paddle. Put your paddle out. It's different than your arm. You can't just put your paddle out and expect it to prop you up. But if you put your paddle out and you scull it, and there's a technique to it, get some whitewater. Go do a whitewater course and learn how to scull. You can lean your boat right over and scull and hold yourself in that position. So. I'm not very good at rolling, but if I'm in a race, I probably couldn't pull off a roll. Yeah. But because I've got such a good brace stroke and such a good... I know where my boat can go. So that it's not a problem.
You don't go over very often. Because I'm a bit the same. It's kind of I often start to go over, and when I think I'm dead and buried, somehow I manage to slap the water and come back up.
A really good, slap, a good reverse brace stroke, and hip flick yourself back up, and then you're up, and it's woohoo, that was fun, and off you go.
So, good point. So, and Steve Gurney talked a little about anticipating, seeing what's ahead. And I had some thoughts also about being in the right place at the right time, anticipating.
Placing your boat,
where you should be. Okay, Em, let's just have a look at a couple of questions here. Andre's asked, what kind of salty foods do you recommend?
Salty's always tough. Bread with a bit of Vegemite would be really good. I used to, my first couple years doing coast, I found that the sandwiches, and during the race I wouldn't use the real grainy bread, I'd use a more processed bread. And so I'd have the bread with Vegemite and a bit of cheese, or I'd have steamed potatoes with the skin, because you want the skin for that a little bit of sustenance when you're out there. And I'd steam them with heaps of salt, and then they're real easy. You just chuck them in your pockets and you can eat them. So those are probably some good ones. You could also do crackers, potato chips, that sort of thing as well, but they're a bit more difficult to eat. So if you're going to sit in transition and have a picnic, then just, bust up the hummus and sun-dried tomato.
Okay, well, what about meats? Beef jerky and things like that?
No, you don't need the protein. Okay. It's going to be too hard on your stomach. You won't absorb it. You're looking at carbohydrate, and the protein you're going to be getting is going to just simply come from within the energy bars that you're having, and it's just the naturally occurring oats and the bits of, if there's a bit of protein powder in them, or a bit of dairy or that sort of thing.
Yeah, okay. Look, that's wonderful. No beef jerky. Well, that's what I've heard.
No.
Okay, so it's probably time to close. I just wanted to mention one more thing. Do you have like a date? I mean, say for me it was 3 weeks out, where I would go and do like a big weekend.
Mm-hmm.
And I would try and mimic the race. It would be sort of like I'd go and do my 3K run, and I'd do say like a 2.5 hour bike ride, and then I'd get off and run for maybe an hour, and then I might have a bit of lunch and then go walking in the hills or something like that.
Exactly.
What do you think?
That's called the race simulation, and it's a very good idea. I do one every year before Coast to Coast, and generally around, like if the coast is that second weekend of February, generally around I think I usually do mine around the 20th to 25th of January.
So that's
I do my race
is that 2 weeks out or 3 weeks?
That's more like 3 weeks out.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely do a big race sim. If you're doing the 2-day, you can do a shorter race sim, and that's perfectly fine. And the only difference really with the 2-day, especially with nutrition, is you don't have that. You don't have what I have on what a longest day person would have on that middle bike ride.
Right.
You sort of skip that part. So yeah.
Okay. Look, that's great. Look, Emily, thanks so much for coming along, and we wish you well in all your endeavours. And
Thank you.
May M's Power Cookies power you wherever you're going to go next.
Yeah. Look on powercookies.com. You can become a friend on Facebook. Facebook.com/M's Power Cookies. And actually, if any of you have any questions, I do some consulting. So just email me through the website, and I can help you out.
What is your website?
It's powercookies.com. And also, if you have just a quick question, as long as you're not going to ask me like a book, I'm very happy just to do some one-offs, some short emails back if you've got a quick question about something. It's fine. So
that's wonderful. Look, thanks for coming on, and once again, thanks to Speight who have sponsored these web seminars. We'll be back in a couple of weeks, and this will be dedicated to support crews. And I'll have another guest along who'll be talking about how to be a support, because I sure as heck don't know.
I've got to do it this year, and I have no idea what I'm doing.
Yeah, so, I guess you're going to find out, mate.
Wish me luck.
You'll have to come back next year. So thanks very much to Speight, and thanks for Emily for coming along.
Thanks for having me.
Hopefully we'll see you in a couple of weeks. And tell your friends.
Yeah,
we'll see you again.
Definitely tell your friends. This is great, guys. Bye.
Bye.